Welcome back to my channel. This is Charles from the channel Books on Stereo, and I'm here to bring you guys a really special interview today. I have one of my favorite authors on my channel here today, and I'm also joined by my great booktube friend slash bookstagram friend as well, Desiree from Genki Reader. But today we're going to be talking to Roan Parrish. If you haven't read her books, I don't know what you're doing. Like, I need you to go out and read these books because they're so incredibly good. You have such heart-wrenching stories, but also such good steam. I'm like, the Middle of Somewhere series, I was like, I need to take a break. I was like, the second book destroyed me. I was like, I was like, but like you kept me in, the steam kept me going, but I was like, oh man, this book this book hurts my heart. Yeah. But how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. This week has felt endless for no real good reason, except like the vagaries of time. I don't know. And I'm so fucking glad it's Friday.
Same. How about you, Desiree?
I'm doing good. I am doing some like auspicious craft things today. I'm painting my TV. Instagram is telling me that I shouldn't do it, but I wanted to paint my TV.
Yeah, you really shouldn't do that.
I'm doing it anyway. I'm tired of it being black. I say that as you have like a really dark background behind you, but I love your background. It's really nice. You have like blue shelves, and I love that. But I didn't want a black TV anymore, so I'm doing great.
Wait, what color are you gonna paint it?
I'm painting it like this really nice, like nutty brown. The color is nutmeg with the Rust-Oleum spray paint. So that's the goal, to like have sort of like a woodsy tone with a bunch of white that I have going in here.
I am so into this, and I can't wait to see how it turns out.
It'll definitely be on my story.
We'll all be waiting and judging. Like, let's see how this comes out. Like, if it's bad, we just won't comment. Our silence will mean enough.
The best thing about paint is like, if it's bad, you can just paint it another color, right?
I have plenty of colors. I could do it again.
Do people warn you against it because it can mess up the actual functioning of the TV? Is that the...
You can do whatever you want with a bunch of different things. You just have to like cover up the vents, the speakers, and like all the ports. But like the rest of it's just like a chassis. It's just plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, people are worried about their screen, which I am too. But like, I triple taped it.
That's not a big concern to you.
I triple taped it. It's good.
Don't do it.
It'll be fine.
Don't do it. But first off, Roan, I want to ask you what got you started in writing romance, especially romance. Were you always a fan of and then you just decided to try it out?
Yeah, it's kind of like a funny story because it was actually a total accident that I started writing romance. And when I was in grad school, I did my PhD in English. And so that meant that I was reading like constantly for school. And so reading has always been my favorite hobby. But when I was reading all the time for school, the last thing I wanted to do at night was read for fun. And so I went back and I started reading like all my favorite young adult books. And the library in Bloomington, Indiana, where I was in grad school, had like also a really big romance section. And I was never a romance reader before, but some of the like young adult started crossing over into some romance stuff. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then one day this was in the day before I didn't have an e-reader. I was just like ordering books from Amazon, and paperbacks would come in the mail, the dark ages. And I saw this like, I'm a big mystery fan, and something got recommended to me that was like a gay mystery, and it was the first book in the Adrian English series by Josh Lanyon, who I love. And I ordered this book because I love mysteries, and I started reading it, and then I was like, wait, there's like a whole genre that's queer and is romance. I am super into this, and because of the fact that was like most of what there was in the genre 10 years ago or however long ago, that's what I started reading. And it was like the perfect escape. I had never read romance, but as a queer person, I was like, oh, queer romance, of course I want to read this. And I got so into it, and I made one of my best friends in grad school also start reading queer romance, and she also loved it. So fast forward a couple years, we were done with grad school. I had left academia, and she had gotten like a real teaching job, like like you were supposed to. And she had just moved to a new town, and she didn't know anyone, and she was really lonely. And I went to visit her, and we were talking, and she was like, I just wish that there was like an escapist romance novel about someone in my situation, like someone who's a new professor, who's not from around here, who doesn't know anyone and comes to this new place. And I was like, oh, I'll write you a story. No problem. I'd never written a book before. I don't know why I thought that I should write a story. But then on the plane home back to Philly, I wrote what ended up being the first chapter of In the Middle of Somewhere. And it was just for my friend. And so I landed and I emailed it to her, and I thought she would write back and be like, you are such a nerd. I can't even believe that you did this. Thank you. But she wrote back and she was like, wait, what happens next? But nothing happened next because I hadn't thought of it as a book. I just like wrote this thing. And so I actually wrote almost all of that book chapter by chapter, emailing it to her. And like there are a lot of jokes in there, or like things about academia that I wrote because she also was in academia and I knew she would think they were funny. And it just, at about halfway through, I was like, maybe I should figure out what is going to happen. But yeah, I wrote that book really for my friend Ani, and she's the one who told me to publish it. I was writing it with no intention of ever publishing it. And she at the end was like, okay, now you should just send it out. And I did, expecting absolutely nothing, like expecting nothing so much that I actually forgot I had even sent it out when the publisher wrote back and said that they wanted to publish it. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess this is like a thing that I can do now. So I owe it all to my friend.
That is absolutely amazing. When you said the professor, I was like, wait, is that inspiration of the first book in the Middle of Somewhere series?
Yeah.
Wow, that is so cool how like that connected.
Yeah, and it was like, full disclosure, Daniel is really very much like me, and like a lot of his experiences I took from my own experiences of grad school, and like I did teach for a couple of years before I left academia. So yeah, but like without my friend telling me to publish it, I do not know that I would have ever done it. So
that's awesome.
That is crazy, because I haven't finished the series. I still have 3 more books left, but because I needed to take a break, because like the second book I was like, when I realized how it was connected. I don't know if you planned out each of the books in advance, but because I know Ginger gets a book later on in the series, I was like, wait, is this MF? I'm like, hold on, what's going on here? I had to double check, and I was like, oh, okay, that's the character. That's the best friend of the character in the first book. Like, how much of that series did you have planned out after you knew the book was going to get published?
Yeah, so as soon as I knew that the first book was going to be published, I knew even while I was writing it, even though I didn't intend to publish it, of course, like I couldn't not be thinking about it. And so I knew that I wanted Colin to have a book and Will and Leo to have a book. And I actually originally was going to have book 3 be the second book in the series, until I realized that he was too young. Leo was too young. I needed to give him some time to age up. And also that I really wanted the first 2 books to be kind of like a diptych, where they were really like mirroring one another and setting off one another's differences. So that's how I decided to do that. Even though I mean, like your response, I think is what a lot of people have had, which is like, that's a pretty emotional, dark book. And I was really concerned that, first of all, no one would want to read it because they would go into it and be like, I hate Colin. I don't want him to be happy. I don't want to read his book. And then they would like never read the rest of the series. And oops, I screwed myself. But also because I thought like people would read that one and be emotionally destroyed and never read the third one. So it was like, I don't know. I went for it. So
yeah, the second book had me in tears. I was just like, this is so, and like the way that you tackled like homosexuality and how that kind of ties into familial relationships. I was like, oh man, I feel for this. And like you actually go there with that character, and it makes a happily ever after so much more worth it. Like everything is not like, oh, we just like had a conversation and we're all kumbaya. I like how you take the characters through that journey, even in all your books.
Thank you.
You don't let them take the easy way out. So they actually arrive to the happily ever after, but they're not completely 100% healed. So I was
Yeah.
wondering, did you do a ton of research with going into the second book, knowing that was such a heavier subject matter?
I mean, I knew I had a lot of things that I really wanted to put in that book. One is that, like, so I live in Philadelphia, and although I myself, like, my journey of queerness, I have had a very angst-free time. I'm extremely lucky and privileged to, like, have not had that been a big problem in my life. But I know a huge number of queer people who've had their lives absolutely destroyed for periods of time, especially by their families. And in Philadelphia, especially, like, and this book is set in South Philly, which, for anyone who is familiar at all with the city, is like, it's a very, it's like a specifically white working class neighborhood. Whereas, like, the majority of Philly is, like, it's a majority Black city. There's a lot of artists and, like, radical political folks in lots of the other neighborhoods. And South Philly is it's like more white, working class, and much more conservative. And so when I like, I knew that was the family that Daniel came from in book one, but I really wanted to take that seriously for Colin in book two, because that is not the kind of family where you come out and you're like, hey guys, and your family's like, oh, okay, well, I will change my entire view of the world that I've lived with generationally and suddenly accept you. Like, that is the kind of family where you either take Daniel's path and you decide that you want to live your live your truth, and you have to sacrifice your family maybe to do it, or you take Colin's road and you think, my family is everything to me and I can't bear the potential that I might lose them, so I will stifle this part of myself. And then, of course, that has lots of other effects. And then also, Rafe, Colin's love interest, is heavily involved in prison abolition, which is something that I also have been involved with for a long time. And so he works with Books Through Bars, which is there are things like that in most cities, but that's the Philadelphia version of one. And Colin has no experience with, like, radical politics or in any way. He's not from that world. And so when he and Rafe meet, I think one of the things I really wanted to do was to show Colin or demonstrate through Colin that there are, like, so many ways of being marginalized and silenced, and that he's experiencing only one of them with his family and with sexuality. And I wanted Rafe to have something to offer him, but not to be just an educator or a savior. Mm-hmm. I wanted Rafe to also want something from him. And so I didn't have to do a lot of research on certain aspects of it. This is like to turn left. The most research I did was on cars, because I know nothing about cars, and Colin is a mechanic. And so I watched all these YouTube videos of people doing car things just to be able to write paragraphs where Colin had to talk about cars. So that was actually the most research that I did. I love sexy books, and I feel like as a reader, what I always want is I want the sex to be raw and character revealing, and I want it to move the emotional truth of the characters farther along. And I think that again, this is just a taste thing, but to me, it's way sexier to have an emotional connection. And so when I was writing, especially those two books, I really wanted that super hot, but also super intimate. Because I think I wouldn't say that, I think both these characters kind of have an intimacy kink where to be known, to be seen, to see their desires accurately seen is really hot for both of them.
What do you think about with for sex in books? So there's this whole debate recently about romance books in general. I don't know if you've heard about people on TikTok as romance readers kind of bashing romance for it being just smutty books, which is fine. Smut is fine, but I think when I read a book, especially for me, if the characters aren't on an emotional level yet, when there's a sex scene, I'm just not invested. So once they're there and there's a sex scene, I'm okay, I'm totally into this. And all the books I've read by you so far, I haven't gotten to the middle of somewhere or whatever the title is of that one yet. I'm bad with titles, sorry. I haven't gotten to that yet, but the ones I have read, they're my thing. That's like what I want in my character. So that's why I cried so hard in Corbin Whale, because like you really hit that for me in that type of emotional connection. So what would you say about that with like the whole controversy that people have about it just being smutty books when really it's more than that, I think?
Yeah, I think it is too. Well, I'm so glad that you felt that way in my books. And I think, well, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think my base level fundamental critique is that people think there's something wrong with smut. And the only reason people think there's something wrong with smut, especially like speaking about books, is because of misogyny and people thinking that like romance novels are for women, quote unquote, which obviously is bullshit, but you know, that's like the discourse of the genre. And it's like people learning from our culture that people enjoying themselves in any way that isn't like socially sanctioned to make babies or make cis men come is grotesque, right? And like, of course, romance novels, no matter what the pairing or the readership, get lumped into that category. So I think that issue in the TikTok debate is just like an unfortunate outgrowth of misogyny. And so mostly I dismiss it because I'm just like, well, get an analysis, learn to love yourself, you'll be okay kind of thing. But I think specifically, like, I do not think, I mean, I think there are lots of romance novels out there where the sex scenes are not intimate or personal. And that's fine. That's some people's jam. But I feel like there are so many romance novels out there where the sex is so clearly about developing the relationship, like letting the character have pleasure because you want the character to be happy and feel good. And I do not really understand why anyone wouldn't want that for everyone who wants it. I'm like, do you make TikTok videos telling people to like stop masturbating too? Like, what the hell? Don't you want us to be happy? What's the issue?
To me, it's so weird because it is like it's other girls on the platform who are kind of putting down other female readers, and it's weird to me because they also partake. They have like this whole library in the back of them full of romance novels, like I do behind me, and I'm like, so you read it, you're obviously a reader, and you partake in it and you enjoy it, but you're calling it, you know, guilty pleasures and, you know, the negative connotations of like a read. I hate the guilty pleasure thing. I really do. You know, I used to use it like this is my guilty pleasure, but I really like it. So why do I have to feel guilty about it? You know, it's just
yeah, and I think that the guilty pleasure, I think so many of us have been taught that like we should feel guilty about reading things for the same reason that people are critiquing them, right? That it's like you shouldn't want to read something that centers the pleasure of queer bodies or female bodies or trans bodies or like any of that stuff. And I'm not surprised that we've been fed that message because it's like that's what the world wants. But this shaming, I hate, and I also hate the idea that, I mean, I think so much of it comes from a like not like other girls discourse of
it's big in romance.
It's big in romance.
She's not like not like any other girl. I'm like, come on.
And I read that in like a synopsis once, and I was like, ooh, this is the first line of the synopsis. She's not like other girls.
Embarrassing.
I was just like,
And it's so infuriating because it's like, not only does that entire discourse make it even harder for like people who read romance who aren't cis women to get into it and to feel great about buying those books, but it's like it doesn't do, like, it makes them feel even guiltier for the pleasure that they take in that thing. And so like, I'm curious for you, Charles, how has your experience been as a romance reader who's like not a cis woman?
Oh, I'm curious.
It's been kind of interesting. I haven't had like any negative experiences, I would say. It's more realizing that I'm in reading a genre that's primarily built towards women, especially. So I do take into account like how I act in certain situations, or when talking to other booktubers, I make sure that I'm like, okay, let me check my male privilege, let me not go mansplaining, something and really kind of like be a little bit more hesitant. Because I used to read more YA, adult fiction, nonfiction, and then I just started reading romance. And I was like, okay, I'm addicted. I was like, I want more people because I just realized like some of the like TV shows that I like have like a huge romance element, or like almost any major piece of media or film has some type of huge romance, like Spider-Man and Mary Jane, Vampire Diaries. Almost everyone has these ships. Even in YA, I started to notice them more and more. I'm like, I ship these two couples, like, but what would I didn't even know what a romance would look like until I stumbled on Kindle. I was like,
Right.
oh, what is this? And then I was shocked to see how steamy it was, and I was like, okay, maybe let me try something else to get me into the genre. And so like, that's how I started. But I
Yeah.
think I think there's like this shame definitely around reading romance that is becoming less and less with like successes like Bridgerton and whatnot coming from Shonda. I think you're starting to see more people kind of go, yeah, I read romance, and I'm comfortable talking about it and having healthy discourses around it. But
Yeah.
it's definitely I want more men to get into reading romance. We don't need
Yeah.
to dominate, but
Yeah.
I think it'll help to like know what pleasure is like a woman. Like reading a book, I'm like, okay. I was like, this is interesting. I was like, okay, this is good education right now.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I
Mhm,
think you're so right about romance being at the center of so many of the major like franchises and things that we watch. And it's one of the reasons I'm always so surprised when I hear people say they don't like romance, but they love like Vampire Diaries or one of these things. I'm like,
Yeah.
that is an epic romance. It's just an
it is.
ensemble cast that has multiple romances. But like pick up any young adult. I mean, it is based on a young adult
Hmm.
series, like paranormal series. But yeah, I feel like romance, there's so much about relationships, romance, or other intimate relationships that are like at the center of human experience, not necessarily sexual relationships, but like,
Hmm.
I don't know. I feel like having feelings and relationships at the center of a book, if it's like sibling feelings and relationships, then it's called literary fiction. And if it's romantic feelings and relationships, then it's called romance. And one of those is exalted culturally and the other is demonized. And it's just like, there's just not that big a difference.
I like about romance so much is even like before they get romantic, a lot of the times they become friends and they get on this
Hmm.
sort of like same spiritual and mental level with each other that I just find really endearing. I know that some people they said they would prefer to have more just friendship books, but I'm like, there's also friendship in the romance that they have before they
Hmm.
become lovers, and I think that that gets widely overlooked a lot of the time when they talk about we should have more friendship, which we should. I mean, it's fine if you
Hmm.
don't want the romance, but I just think that it's really overlooked. And again, it's unfortunate when people use the narrative. I don't read romance. I would like more friendship books. That's like one of my second biggest pet peeve is when they use that as the counter to romance.
Yeah, and there are
So,
so many great romance novels where it's like they're friends and there's a whole friend group and an ensemble. And especially in romance, I think authors like set those up to be next books in a
Hmm.
series. So it's not just about like the like one couple. It's about when you put all those books together, you can see the way these friend groups interact and like one person meets their love interest because of a friendship or because of knowing
yeah,
another couple. And I
Hmm.
love that, those like ensemble
yeah, those are
pieces where you
cute.
get to know the secondaries.
Finally like finished. Well, I didn't finish, but I have one book left in a series. I'm bad with series, so I finally got to the fifth
Same.
book in the it's an Eden Finley series. I can't remember. It's her hockey and
It's our
football
hockey
series.
one, right?
Yeah, hockey and football. I can't remember the name of the series again. I'm bad with the names, but I finally got to the fifth book, and they're so intertwined with their friendships that I just think it's really cute that I can see the first couple all the way in book five interacting and acting stupid together in the background, and it's just adorable. I love it. I
I
should
love
read more
that.
series, to see the more of the dynamic. But yeah, just them going together as friends throughout the series is really endearing and adorable, and it's so underrated.
And one thing I do love about your books, Roan, is that they don't take place in a vacuum, especially with the romance. It tends you see in some romances when when the two characters meet, it's like their best friend falls to the wayside, their other best friend fall. I'm like, wait, what happened to what happened to your best friend? Like they're just like nowhere present, or like any family or any other characters. And then like you're like, oh, remember that side character I mentioned in the beginning Oh yeah, wait, they're getting a book. I mentioned them briefly, but just so you know, I like how your books, like you get so much about the characters, but you get so many other interactions outside of them, outside of when they're together, especially in, I believe, Natural Enemies.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect for you to go that hard on like botany in that novella. I was like, what? I was like, hold on. I was like, this is more detailed than the car information. I was like, the way they were talking, I was like, I thought it would just be like how in some romances is like, oh, they play this sport, but we never actually go into detail about the sport. I'm like, but you went into detail about botany and managed to keep this theme. So I was like, when they started talking about plants, I was like, Rowan, I was like, what are you doing? I don't know if this is gonna work. I don't know if this is gonna work for me, but you managed to pull off. So how was like that writing that specific novella? Did you do a ton of research before going into that
Yeah,
one as well? Because it showed. I was like,
thank
what?
you.
I was like all these like Italian, like Latin words. I was like, am I in a romance book?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm a huge plant lover, but I actually didn't get into plants until after I wrote that book, and I kind of think writing that book got me into plants. But my grandmother, who my mom's from Brooklyn, and my whole family on that side is from Brooklyn, and so I spent a lot of time there in where Natural Enemies is set as a kid, and my grandmother was super into plants, not from like she wasn't educated about botany, but she could grow anything. And so there were like always plants in her house, and I was really taken by this, but I never like was good with plants. I just never got into it. And I wrote this book, I think because I had been to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and really loved it. And I was like, oh, I should set a book there. That would be so good. And I did a lot of research on the botany stuff, but I also like I became obsessed with Pinterest, Pinterest boards where people were pinning these like apartments that were completely taken over by plants, and like especially people in urban spaces who would turn like their rooftop into a garden, or would have like 2,000 plants in this tiny little like third floor walk up. And I was so delighted by the idea of kind of like urban spaces and the way that nature can transform urban spaces. And obviously I live in an urban space, and at the time I wrote that, I lived in like a very small 1-bedroom third floor walk up, and I had almost no place for plants, and I was just starting to get into them. And so I had like my 2 windows just crammed with all the plants, but there was no sunlight in the whole rest of the apartment. And so I would like look at these Pinterest boards and dream about having these like rooftop gardens. But I just really liked the idea of that there were 2 different ways to think about plants. There was like the botanical, very educated, like Stefan knows all these Latin words for all the plants, and he's like a research scientist. He's very educated about that stuff. And then you have Milo, who's like also educated and stuff, but he's not interested in like the cultivars of an orchid or whatever. He's like, plants are amazing. I love plants. Plants are a way to connect with my community and to like give people something to love the way I love them. And the way that like those 2 attitudes toward the same thing could first cause friction and then like coexist. I was really taken by the idea of like these 2 characters doing botany and their love for plants really, really differently.
I had a favorite scene in the book where they're doing, he brings in his plant that he's genetically engineered, and he's like, do you know how to take care of it? He's like, well, I'm pretty sure it's just whatever the plant was, it's just this plant. I think I know how to do that. And he's like, oh, okay, I see you've taken care of it the way it's supposed to be taken care of. Like, I love that scene.
It's just like how they meet. How Stefan goes and meets Milo. It's like, who is this dude on this list? Let me go check him out. Let me be snarky the whole entire time. I was like,
well, it's funny
I loved it.
That's the most enemies to lovers book I've ever written. And in my head, I was like, this is going to be enemies to lovers. I feel like they're enemies for like maybe 14 pages. And then it goes away, because I am like, if I know some people love enemies to lovers and I enjoy reading it, but as a real, like in my real life, if I don't like someone, I want them to get the hell away from me, and having sex with them is the last thing I could possibly imagine. So my attempt to write enemies to lovers, I was like, well, they better become friends quick, because I cannot handle like the idea of being attracted to someone I hate.
Yeah, those like really intense ones are hard. I don't know how some people would write it, let alone read all the way through. I read like 1 or 2 Mariana Zapatas, and the hate to love was really hateful. And I'm just like, am I gonna like this at the end? People say it's amazing, but like, it's really hateful. So I get that.
It's a lot.
I love hate. Enemies to lovers is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, you really don't hate it's like, you really don't hate each other. I'm like, I see, because like then they get like hate banging and all that stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
I eat the stuff. I eat the stuff like catnip. Desiree knows.
You know what? I'll
knows
amend what I said, because like I'll eat up the ones where it's clear that they actually don't hate each other, like the hating game where they actually didn't hate each other. It was like clear from day one they didn't hate each other, but they had this whole game about hating each other. Those I eat up, like, you know, that's chef's kiss amazing. But when they really hate each other, it's really hard for me to get through it, because that's too much. If I don't like somebody, you're gonna know, even though I try to like cover it up. It's just my face is too expressive, and people know when I don't like them.
I love that. That's such a blessing though, because I imagine it saves time and bullshit of having to like be nice to people that suck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do want to talk about probably my favorite ongoing series from you, and it's the Garnet Run series. I adore the first book with like all my heart, and then what you did with the second book, I was like, wait. I was like, Roan did that. Like non-penetrative, like sexy times. I was like, I didn't really like. I love how you challenge that notion in like a major published book. I was like, what? I was like,
yeah.
I was like, what? I was like, what is this? I was like, I never read a romance book that ever really did that. It was like most of all the romance books, like it is leading up to like penetrative sex. That's like how it's been defined. And I like how you challenge that notion.
Thank you.
And kind of flip, especially with Charlie's character, how he's like the way he's described as like the big masculine character, like almost like gave me Rex and Rafe vibes a little bit. And you think they're gonna be the dominant. He's like, no. He likes to get spanked. I was like, okay. I was like, I did not like those books. I was like, I love the kink involved, and I was like, I wanted to know, like, especially with your third book coming out as well. That's going to be Harley Quinn Presents.
Harley Quinn Special Edition, yeah.
I was like, and I did not realize that that's the first MM that they ever did in one of their series lines. I'm like, after how many books?
I know
they have published. I'm like, this is the first one. Yeah. It's just crazy to me.
I know.
They're catching up slowly.
Yeah.
Slowly.
I hope it'll be good. I mean, it's interesting. Well, okay, sorry. To take the first thing that you said, I'm so glad that you noticed that and liked that. It was really important to me to, I mean, first of all, I think like I don't think there's anything wrong with women writing romance. I want to be really clear, because I know that's often like a divisive thing in the community, and that this is like no shade to that at all. I think like we live in a patriarchy, and male characters have the opportunity to behave in ways in books that some female characters don't have. And so women taking those characters and writing them is often an act of attempting to be like generic, and men are the only characters who are able to be generic in a patriarchal society. And so that's like, I do not have a problem at all with women writing MM, obviously, as I am one. But I do think that what so often happens is that MM romance specifically sort of becomes like a copy of MF romance. And in MF romance, penetrative sex is considered like the ultimate sex act. And as a queer person, like, I don't think that, like that's not where I'm coming from. I don't, and I think that there are a lot of people, whatever your gender or sexuality, who are not interested in penetrative sex for whatever reason. And there are so many sex acts that are intimate and loving and hot and whatever, and don't have anything to do with penetrative sex. And it mattered a lot to me to write a character like Charlie, who like you said, is kind of like, you would read him, and if you've read books in the genre, you would expect that because he's larger and culturally more masculine, that he would be more dominant. And like, that's not true for so many people in real life. And also that like, I wanted his discover like his sexual journey to be individual to him, because that's really the way it is like, just because you learn later in life about what you want sexually, it doesn't mean that you're going to want like the exact same thing that you would have wanted when you were 18 or that other people want. And so and like when I was writing it, actually, I asked a friend, I was like, I really want them to not have penetrative sex. Do you think readers will be disappointed? And she was like, some probably will be, but if you do it in a way that's hot, that's okay. And so I was sitting with it and I was like, in the end, if people are disappointed because they didn't have penetrative sex, I don't care. That's fine. You can be disappointed. There are tons of books out there that do that. So you can go read one of those. And then it was like a challenge to myself that I wanted to make it hot enough that nobody could say ever again that you need to have penetrative sex to have it be steamy. So it was like a very active choice and one that was really important to me. And I'm super gratified that you liked it.
I loved it too.
Like, when you made it steamy, I was like, how does she make this? Like, how is it steamy? I'm like, this. Because after the first book, I was like, okay, I know how this book's going to go. Like, they're going to help fix up the house. They're going to, like, do it all over the place in, like, very, like, unsafe places. And I already had it mapped out, but then I was like, wait. He's not the character I expected. I'm like, hold up. So I had to like reevaluate and calculate. I'm like, is this gonna work? Like, it's like, hold on, let me read this closer. I'm like, and then it got to, I was like, okay, I'm never doubting you ever again. I was like, I trust you with all, because I think the first, I can't remember the kink involved in the first book. I know it was like a tell me what you want. I don't even know what you would call it, but I was like, and this is like a traditionally published book. I was like, whoo. I was like, let me put. No one else can read. This book is between me and the book right now.
Me and the book. Oh, that's cute. I loved it so much. The part where you did the list reading in the second book, that was the part that I really focused on. Honestly, when you said that there was no penetrative sex, I didn't notice. Because it felt intimate enough for me. Like I said, I'm more about the intimacy than like the act itself. So I was totally like completely satisfied by what happened with those two characters. Good. Also, I'm a huge boys love manga reader, and I also feel the same way about that whole genre in Japan, where it's mostly women. There are men who do it. They go underneath female pen names, just like in romance here, and I think it's kind of got a correlation going. There is like a bunch of different types of couples that you see, and one of my favorites is when there's like a really masculine character and you find out that he doesn't like to top because it doesn't bring him pleasure, and it's completely valid and recognized by the couple themselves. So I love when I see that in romance, even if it's a straight couple. I really like when that dynamic can be incorporated, because I think that is a little bit more realistic for some people. Not everyone wants to be a traditional dynamic. I'm a very tall woman. I'm 5'10". So like if I were to ever get with a guy, most of the guys I meet are shorter than me. I've never dated anyone, but I'm just saying if I were to ever meet a guy and he's shorter than me, our dynamic wouldn't be typical. So it's just like, I like non-typical dynamics in my books. So the list was awesome for me. I think that's where I was just like, the feels type part. In your first book in that series, this is the first series I ever read by you. They had this one scene where he draws his partner. I love that. It was really intimate, and I think that was just it was sexy, it was sweet, it was intimate, and I adored that. That was great. That was chef's kiss.
Thank you. Well, to me, this I think comes back to intimacy, like we've been talking about, that like every couple that has sex in a different way because each person is different, and there's so many. Like, this is why I always want there to be just like more and more and more diverse books of all kinds, is because that's the way you get to see like the breadth of human experience. And when you think about it, like, it's so silly to imagine that someone's size has anything to do with their sexual desires. Like, it's an absurd notion, any more than to be like all blondes like this and all brunettes like that. It's like, that doesn't, like, when you say it like that, it's so silly. And yet, like, the discourses of pornography and kink and all this stuff have had such a strong effect on on romance. And I really do think that, again, like MF romance like has influenced MM romance in this way that I think is a kind of unfortunate, where like in MF romance, so often it's like the woman is smaller than the man and is the one being penetrated. And it has like been taken into MM romance as if like that is also true, that like if you have the like a man who is smaller, then he takes the role of what would be the female in MF romance. And like when you say it out loud like that, it's the silliest thing in the world. It makes no sense. It's not based in anything. It's ridiculous. But it is like something that, because there are so many books that started out that way, it's become a real kink for people, which is totally fine. I mean, I've written books like that too, because that can be hot also. But I really do feel like we're getting to a place, hopefully, in romance, and especially in queer romance, where we can like unpack those things a little bit and be like, yeah, there are as many ways to have sex as there are people who want to have sex. And the more books we write that show those different ways, the more options are open, not just for people writing it, but also for readers who are discovering sexuality through those books, to not internalize those kind of silly power dynamics, and to read books where they're like, yeah, I'm a really large masculine dude and I want to get fucked, and here's a book that says it, or I don't want to get fucked, whatever, you know, like, and I feel like that's just important across the board in romance, to like show all the different ways that are totally great to have sex.
Yeah, and too, I appreciate the racial diversity in your books as well. It's like you have some characters that like that are minority, and it's never tokenized. It's just like, oh, okay, that character's this. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
didn't change anything about the character, but it was nice seeing that representation in the book where none of the plot really was relying on their race. I was like, oh, I really enjoyed that, because like usually for like MF romance, it's like I need to see the diversity on the cover. Or I'm like, I didn't really pick up. I didn't really like. Did you ever mention that the character was a minority, or like sometimes it has to go over on the other end where it's like very prevalent in the book, and I like this, especially in the MM genre. It's usually very white. You're starting to see more pop up nowadays, but like I would say most of like the a lot of the popular MM titles usually are focused on like a white male couple. And it's like nice to see like in your books where you're like, oh, this character's black, this character's Asian, and it's just like it doesn't change the story, it's there. And I just love that about your books as well. I'm like, we're getting so much diversity in your books, and then your Rockstar series. I need to gush about Roan Reese. That book, that webcam scene. I had to take a moment. I was like Theo has nothing on this relationship. I'm sorry. I read their book and I read Roan's book. I read Roan. I was like, okay. I was like, the book. I was like, oh, and it's a marriage. It's a married couple. I was like, you don't see that very rarely at all in MM. I like how even with your Rockstar series, you took it in a different direction. It's like age gap. It's like I was thinking, it's like, oh, it's gonna be like Theo's band, and we're gonna go through other romances. Like, no. Yeah. We're like dealing with like older rock stars and they're happily ever after. So like, was it something you wanted to play with in the rock star genre?
Yeah. I, you know, when I first proposed that the Riven series in general, I think that the publisher was like, thought exactly what you thought and was like, yeah, great. Rockstar books are big. We'll go through the band. And I had like sold Riven. The book was already written when I sold it, but the others in the series, the second and third books weren't. And I think they were like, great, we'll publish this. And then I was like, one sec, here's books 2 and 3. And I just, you know, I wrote the one that was kind of Rockstar-ish. And then I was like, I'm just not really as interested in showing all like a 360 view of this one band. I'm much more interested in like I don't know, I'm a huge music fan, but also like I'm 39. So I grew up watching MTV and VH1 and like watching Fame destroy every single like sweet human being that was involved in the music industry. And I wanted to write a series that was about how horrible fame is in lots of ways. And like in Riven, even, you know, like Theo loves the music part, but he hates all the intrusiveness of everything. And as a also like you, Desiree, like an introvert who is not super social, being famous is my worst nightmare. Like leaving your house and having people look at you, or like going outside in your pajamas,
God, yeah.
and having people take pictures of you, like literal nightmare territory. And so I was really interested in like showing the ways that there's such a sacrifice that has to be made to like a tithe to fame. And that if you want to be big in that way, sometimes you have to deal with all these like horrible other things. And I remember like reading stuff in, you know, People magazine or something at the dentist's office where people are like, well, if they didn't want to deal with fame, then they shouldn't have gotten famous. And I'm like, first of all, it's not like within people's control to decide whether to get famous. Otherwise, a whole different group of people would also be famous. But also like, that's so ridiculous. That's like saying if you choose something, you have to accept that all pieces of it are perfect, which is so unrealistic. Like, even with your dream, like I have my dream job. I love being an author, but there are still parts of it I hate and I wish I didn't have to do, you know, like my taxes or certain promo stuff. Like every single job, no matter how much you like one piece, has shit that you hate. Anyway, I digress. But so I wanted to write a series that like acknowledged the complicated before, during, and after of being famous and being a musician. And so Theo's book was sort of like the during. So he was already famous and was like living with that. And then in book Caleb's, his love interest story was a sort of like after, where he had been famous and had this issue with addiction and like now was trying to deal with it. And then in book 2, Reese's sort of was like a before, because he was transitioning from being a session musician to being a famous in his own right. And that book, the already married book, I'm so thrilled that you loved it, because that's one of my favorite books I've written. I have never been married, so I don't know, but I was really curious about, I don't know, marriage is something that I wanted to explore, this idea that like some people think that marriage is magic, that it's like a commitment forever, like just because you sign your names on a piece of paper or something, that means that your relationship transforms. And so I wanted to show the total breakdown of a marriage and like everything that it was presumably built on, in order to have a romance that started sort of in the middle, or like had to start all over again. And as far as like diverse characters go, thank you for saying that. It's I'm of two minds about it always, that I have two things that I'm trying to always keep in mind. One is that I want to portray the world with all of the amazing diversity that is in it. And two is that I'm a white person and there are some stories that are just not for me to tell. And so I always want to make sure that I'm walking a respectful line between, like, I do not want to whitewash all my books and suggest that the world is full of only white people, but I also don't want to tell stories that because I am already a published author and I have a certain level of power, I don't want to use that power in a way that tells stories that I shouldn't be telling and then gains readership for them that I shouldn't, that shouldn't happen. And yeah, I feel like there are different moments in the conversations around publishing and around writing where that, like, there are ebbs and flows in what feels like the best way to be real about what the world is, and also to take a step back and be like, this is not the moment where I'm the voice that's needed to do anything. And so I have written a lot of characters of different ethnicities and religions and races in the past, and I really hope to be able to keep doing that. I've had the support of sensitivity readers, which was invaluable to me, to make sure, like, there are just, of course, things that I am ignorant about and can't know. And so I was really lucky to be able to work with folks who knew more than I did. And I'm, I'm hoping that in the future that there are more stories that I can tell that will reflect the world, but not cut anybody out of it, if that makes sense.
I think you toe that line pretty well. I think that was a good description of how, like, at least in the books that I've read by you, how the characters of color and diverse backgrounds have come across. I really like when I read specifically a Black character, because I'm obviously Black, where they just kind of are allowed to be. I've kind of struggled with a lot of the books that have been pushed as of late because of the Black Lives Matter movement by the community. They're all really Black pain books, and before that, I would never have picked them up for obvious reasons. I don't really want to sacrifice myself just for the sake of me to put out content because I am a Black creator. I want to enjoy my reading. Obviously, those stories are important. They're there for somebody and for the community, but I just don't particularly like to partake in them. So I like when the characters are allowed to be and to have like a good time. Going back to Natural Enemies, I love that one a lot. As I love that there's a Black character who is like a stoic and he's like uptight, and you actually really showed the way that Black people interact as sort of like the snooty side of Black people really well.
Thank you.
I don't know how to better phrase that, but you did it really well.
he was quite bougie. He was like quite uppity. I was like,
going back to his mom, I was like, yeah, this is accurate.
And then I also want to touch on Thrall. I haven't finished it yet. I think I'm on part 2 because it's quite a long one and there is no audiobook available yet. I was like, I was gonna message you. I'm like, Roan, I was like, I need an audio. Like, you're killing me here.
We're working on it.
I'm sitting here going like, okay. I saw the page. I'm like, 400 pages. I was like, I'm gonna make an effort to read my 2 chapters a day, and I will finish the book in like 3 months.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I will say word count wise, it's not that much longer, but it's like laid out because of the chat and stuff. So if you just think of it like it's the same number of words, it's just like it's spreading out on the page, it's taking up space.
But like it's such an easy reading experience, and I wasn't, as someone who has read Dracula and appreciates it, it's not my favorite classic horror. My favorite is Frankenstein. So it was like halfway through, I was like, I kind of wish this was Frankenstein, because if someone told me before I read Dracula, they're like, oh, Dracula's in the entire book. And I was like, and I read the book and I was like, after the first couple chapters, I'm like, where is Dracula? So like going into your book, I was like, okay, I already know, like, if this is going to be a faithful adaptation, Dracula has to be like a peripheral, and the app that you created and the mystery with Parker and like telling the story to like it's told like through like social media, text messages. It's such an interesting format. I was like, ooh, I was like, I see the elements, like all the characters are there, but the way you're kind of rearranging it and playing with that story, I was like, I didn't think there was a way to like really retell Dracula in an interesting way, besides like making them like Twilight or like your paranormal vampires that are super good looking, have flawless skin and never age. Right. I was like, this was quite interesting, and like the murder mystery aspect to it as well. I was like, ooh. I was like, okay. I was like, I see where you're going with. So how did that book come about?
Oh my gosh, that book has such a long journey, and I love that book. I know that like the reception of that in romance circles was tepid at best, but so that actually was originally going to be part of Riptide's. They were doing like retelling series, and Avon Gale, my co-writer, and I had proposed, like we actually each proposed Gothic novel retellings for that series, and one of the editors was like, oh, interesting, I'm so glad we have so many Gothics. And then Avon and I, we were already friends and had already written one book together. We were like, was it you who proposed the other Gothic novel? And we were like, yeah, it is. And we had both proposed like Gothic vampire novels. I think she proposed Carmilla and I'd proposed Dracula, and we were like, well, should we just write it together? Like that sounds really fun. So Frankenstein is like the most perfect novel ever written. I'm so with you. I definitely like it better. And I would love, you're actually really making me want to do a Frankenstein retelling.
I was like, I'm getting major Frankenstein. I'm like, it has to happen. Oh, I was like, I can already chart the romance in my head. I'm like, so I was like, let me not like DM and like sound like a crazy fanboy to Roan. I was like, let me hold myself back, because like if you did that, I would have and like here's 20 other classic novels that like I want retellings.
Oh my gosh. Number one, please always message me with any weird ideas for books. Also, yeah, like I'm lodging that Frankenstein retelling. It's right here. It's right here. We'll see what happens with it.
Oh wait, I'm ready.
Okay, cool. I'll get back to you. But yeah, so Avon and I sat down to write that, and the way we wrote it actually, it was really cool. So the original Dracula, for anyone who hasn't read it, is told. It's an epistolary novel, so it's told in letters, journals, like audio recordings. And there wasn't the same technology in the 1890s, but it is considered an epistolary novel. So we wanted to do the same thing, but since it's in the 21st century, it's like emails and G-chats and texts and stuff like that. And one thing that I think is really cool about epistolaries is you sort of always have this bit of distance between you and the character. And in like Gothic novels, I think that's really cool because things are somehow like a little bit scarier if you don't know if you can trust, if you have like a little bit of an unreliable narrator, or you're hearing the same story, but it's like from a bunch of different people. So you're reminded not only of the scary thing, but of like the existential horror of realizing that like, even if you and someone else were in the same place, you had totally different experiences and there is no actual truth. And that is just like, oh my God, mind blowing to me. But so we plotted it out, and what we really wanted to figure out was like, okay, we're not going to have real vampires because it's been done a million times. So like, what is vampirism in the 21st century? So I am a huge nerd and also studied the Gothic in grad school. And so I was like, well, okay, in the 1890s, I mean, I promise I'm not about to go on an entire rant about everything Dracula meant in the 19th century, but Dracula, there was like, in this moment, Eastern Europeans coming from the East to London, the West. It was considered this like threat of foreignness, a threat of Easternness, and that was feminized at the time. So it was like this threat of queerness. And so Dracula coming and buying property in London was this huge metaphor for like Jewish people, Eastern European folks from Asia, and people kind of coming in and like corrupting the pureness of Western Britishness. There was this huge panic at the time of like the corruption of the British nation. Huge eye roll. And so Dracula, like as a vampire, it was literally about like getting his teeth into Britishness and like creating creatures that drained British people of their life and Britishness. And also just like every imaginable like Jewish stereotype that you can think of about like money and buying property and hoarding and all this stuff. And so I was like, okay, what are the threats, quote unquote, that we see now that are as big and as like scary to contemporary folks as those threats were to the British people at the time? Only like, let's not make it horribly racist and sexist. And so the thing that we thought of was it really is about information and data. And like the thing that gets sucked, like the blood of the contemporary blood, is information. So like we all use these devices and we use computers, and every corporation sucks this data from us. Like you go to a website and they record it, you buy a thing and they know what you bought. And like there's this this sense of like you can't be a human in the world of information without putting yourself at risk to having your lifeblood sucked away. And so we were like, that's it. That's what the vampire is in 21st century America. And so that's how we came up with the idea of like an app being this thing that like, I don't want to give anything away, but like takes something from you and requests something of you, or like gets you going in a certain direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I will not spoil the end, but I will say it definitely holds up to Dracula, but it is not what you probably are expecting as you read.
So I do want to ask you too, what are some of your upcoming releases? I know we have the one coming from the third book in the Garnet series. Is there anything else that you plan on this year?
Totally. Oh my God, so many things. You'll never stop hearing from me. So there are books 3 and 4 in the Garnet Run series. So there's going to be 2 more. And like you said, book 3, The Lights on Knockbridge Lane, is actually, so books 1 and 2 were coming out from Karina, and book for Karina is like a part of Harlequin, but not a series line for anyone who cares. And this is, which is like, I don't know I knew nothing about Harlequin until I started writing for them. So I clarify this for other ignorant people like myself who don't know. So then books 3 and 4 are coming out through special editions, which is one of Harlequin's series lines. And it's the first like gay or lesbian romance that they will have ever published through Harlequin series. So they've had a couple of bisexual characters in male-female relationships, but they've never had like a male-male or a female-female relationship in one of the series lines. Yeah, so I feel very like honored that I get to be the first, but I'm also already anticipating like what's interesting, again, for people who aren't Harlequin readers, is like with the lines, a lot of people read everything that comes out from a line. So if you read special editions, you read every book that comes out for special editions. And so what that means is there are people who've been reading special editions for years and years and years who will get The Lights on Knockbridge Lane and be like, what?
What?
Which is great and fine. And I am thrilled to have the opportunity, but it does mean that like the more, when you reach people who aren't choosing your book on purpose, there are a lot of people who don't want gay romance. And there are people who are like actively homophobic and will be homophobic about it. And then there are people who are like, I don't care, I just don't choose to read this, which is totally fine. But I do think that it will be a different experience for me than just publishing a book where like everyone knows this is what I write and they chose it on purpose. So I am curious to see what the discussion will be like. But my real hope is like, I hope so dearly that the book does well enough that Harlequin is like, oh, we should start publishing more MF, trans romance, queer romance of every stripe. Because if it does well financially, you know, that's how it like, it's a bottom line issue for publishers. And like, if it does well financially, it could really open the doors for people. And if it flops, I mean, I know it's not my fault exactly, but I will feel.
It will not flop. I already pre-ordered it in the audiobook.
Me too.
Oh,
well, not audiobook.
I need more of this world.
Thank you both. You're angels.
I will push it on anyone. Like read the first book.
Oh,
you will love it. I won't tell you the Steam level. Just experience it yourself.
Thank you.
I'm already a Harlequin reader. I actually have like a section over that way with the orange and like the red and white. So I'm super excited. But Harlequin is slow. They just had like their first like Black female lead in, I don't remember the line, the one where they go traveling someplace. I forget which line that is.
I know what you're talking about.
Exotic destination for that line. Yeah, they just had her like a couple years ago. So like they're really slow about catching up. So I'm not surprised that they haven't had like an MMFF yet, but glad that they're starting. We're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's like from a just really material issue, Harlequin lines are one of the most they sell really well because people read all the books in the line. And with publishing, like you never know how much money a book is going to make. You never know if your royalties are going to be consistent. And I think like Harlequin series are it's so useful because it's a more predictable, more regular, say it like royalty thing. And the fact that like queer people have not had access to that is like, this would be a big deal materially, I think, for people to be able to like predict when they're going to get paid or like if they're going to get paid. So I'm really, really hoping that this is like a turning point and it's not just a blip on the radar, but that they really like embrace that. That would be cool. And that book it's coming out at the end of September, but it's a Christmas romance and it's my first ever, it's a single dad romance. It's in my head, basically it's like a Hallmark movie or like a Netflix Christmas movie come to life, only not cheesy, hopefully. So it's like single dad, Adam, and his adorable daughter, Gus, who is obsessed with like snakes and spiders, and Adam is terrified of them. And he's like, oh my God, my daughter, she like wants to be an entomologist or something. I just need to like not have to look at spiders, but he loves her and wants her to be a success. And then he moves into this new, he moves back to Garnet Run after getting divorced. And there's this guy, this neighbor on the street that they move into, and all the neighbors are like, we think he's a vampire. We think he's a creep. He never comes out during the day and like skulks around at night. We think he's weird and freaky. And so of course he's the love interest, and he's an inventor and a scientist. And Gus, the daughter, sees that he has like lizards as pets in his basement, and she breaks into his house to like play with the lizards. And he has to return her and be like, does this child belong to you in my basement? And then that's how they start falling in love. So it's awesome. It's really sweet. It's, I hope, funny. There's a lot of shenanigans about like a child who's obsessed with all these like creepy crawly things, and her father who's pretty phobic of them. And it's very Christmassy. Gus, for Christmas, like all she wants is to have the most Christmas lights of any house in the world. And so Adam throughout the book is like trying with like not very much money, trying to find a way to get all these lights so that she can have a happy Christmas. And it's very like, it's heartwarming.
That's cute.
Aww.
I'm in.
Yeah,
I cannot wait.
Like, you'll see the characters from the first 2 books make an appearance in that one. Yeah, so it's sweet. And then book 4 in the series will be coming out like the next October, and it's actually a Halloween book. Halloween is my favorite holiday. I love Halloween so much. And it's basically about a street in Garnet Run called Casper Lane, because there's a town of Casper in Wyoming, so it's kind of named after that. But because it's called Casper Lane, every year they have this like Halloween decorating competition, where the whole street like all decorates the houses, and then kids from local places can come and like trick or treat, and they pick a winner for the house. And so it's about this character who's lived on that street for years and always wins, and is like very competitive and very like needs to win this Halloween competition. And then this new guy who moves to town who's like really chill and just wants to make friends and be accepted in the neighborhood. So he's like, of course I should participate in this competition because that's what all the neighbors do. But he's actually really good at chainsaw carving. And so he starts carving these like huge things. And our friend who really needs to win is like, oh my God, this guy is going to like win and I can't have it. So he starts trying to sabotage him, and they basically start a prank war and then fall in love.
Okay, that's also cute.
Okay, that's also good. That sounds so good.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about them. They're like, you know, my holiday books and my neighbors to lovers situation. What else? Oh, well, so if you're enjoying Thrall and you like Dracula, you might like, I actually just had a project, it's not a book yet, although it will be, come out 2 weeks ago, which is, it's a horror collection called Strange Company, and it's an audio.
I read it.
Yeah. Awesome.
I read it. I saw it. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
My favorite story is the vampire one.
Oh,
Malachi.
cool.
That was my favorite. Yeah. That was my favorite. I was like,
cool.
I told Desiree, I'm like, do you know Roan has like a new like horror anthology? Because I was just stalking your Amazon page, and I was like, okay, it's not that scary.
It's not that scary.
It's not that scary. You'll be fine. I'm a chicken too, so I was like, it wasn't that scary. It had creepy vibes, but it's not like you can't go to sleep at night. It's that scary.
Yeah, I'm the person who can't go to sleep at night, so I tend to avoid certain things.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. It's what was really cool about it for me was I love horror. I'm a huge horror fan, and so writing it was really fun. But also my girlfriend did the music, so it was really a collaboration between the two of us. So she's a musician and she's amazing. And the way we did it was like, for some of them, I would send her the stories and she would compose the music, but then for some, she would write some music and I would write a story based on like what the music made me think of or feel like. And then she did the cover design and all of the like graphic art stuff for it. So it was a really cool collaboration. And I think Audible has like a 6-month exclusivity, but then she'll be putting out like an album of the music, and I'm going to put out the book. So it will be available like to read. But
okay, cool.
If you're going to do it, you should listen to it at the same time because the music is, I mean, I know I'm slightly biased, but I think it's
really good.
But is it was really good. I was like, than like like scary. If it's
Mhm.
spooky, then I
It's
could probably
spooky.
do it, but I can't do scary.
Yeah.
It's spooky and like a little bit eerie, but there's no
Mhm.
extreme violence or gore or like
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I can't do the gore.
Out.
Gore is usually what gets me.
Yeah,
That's
there's
what
no
keeps me up
gore.
at night.
No,
Gore.
you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Okay, then all right,
You
I'll
won't
look
be
into
scared.
it.
It's just it's more spooky vibes. Yeah, I
Okay.
really liked it.
Thank you.
I really liked. I like saw it immediately. I was like, and it's like under Audible Plus too. So like if you're subscribed, you don't have to pay any. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I was
It's
like,
free,
okay.
I saw that. I
free.
automatically one clicked and I was like, okay, I'm done.
Awesome. Yeah, you can also, I think, use it as your like free trial thing if you haven't signed up yet. So it's there. I hope people like it. And I will say the book that I'm writing right now is I'm really, really excited about because I've never written anything like this before. It's a rom-com, but it's a double romance. So it's a house swap romance. So there's one couple and one FF couple. And it's like two people who swap houses, one in New Orleans and one in Maine. And they swap houses and then each fall in love in the places where they are, kind of like The Holiday, that movie from the 90s, I guess, or 2000s. And I'm having so much fun writing it. And also I used to live in New Orleans for a little while. So like being back in the space of New Orleans to write is really fun.
You guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys with a brand new video. Bye, everyone.